welcome. Thank you for joining us this afternoon for Eloqua and consent management. We look forward to sharing a number of points with you, and as always, encourage your participation. Feel free to jump in with the Q&A, and we're happy to answer questions as we move through the afternoon. First of all, just some housekeeping. As you may be aware, we use Zoom to record our webinars, and replays will be available via our blog. Those details are there on the screen. So my name is Derek Bell. I'm the Director for Customer Success and Marketing here at Marketing Cube, and I'm supported today on the line by Matt Hensley, who's our Marketing Manager, and Jason O'Donnell, our Account Director. Let's jump into the agenda and have a close look at what exactly we promised to talk about today. So we'll do a little welcome and introduction, talking to a few points, then jump straight into consent management and looking at ways that Eloqua is able to present that for you. Then looking at some solutions and ideas to help enhance that process. So email groups, forms, and perhaps custom objects. We do allot some time for Q&A as well, but as I said, please feel free to use the Q&A throughout the function. Throughout the webinar. So let's have a look primarily at a couple of questions. We just wanted to drop these in here because we had some questions from our Australian audience as well, which great questions. So we just thought we'd share those as well with you. So one of them relates to analytics, and KCN, based in Sydney, Australia, was asking how she can automate an overview analysis report and other reports from Eloqua. And the easy answer to that question is that it's done using what we call an agent in Insight. So if you do have your mobile phone handy, I'd encourage you to grab that and to scan that particular QR code that you can see on the screen. That will take you to a resource page on our website. We actually don't have it in the navigation. It's more designed for customers. It's really just a summary of some of the resources available to help you with Eloqua Insight. The QR code, I think, will take you about halfway down the page directly to around 6 videos. And one of those videos is how to create an agent. And an agent is what you need essentially to automate the delivery of reports from Insight. So have a look at that video. It only goes for a few minutes. It's really quite easy to follow. I so rarely create an agent that honestly, I often go back to that video and I watch it myself just to recap on the process of what needs to be done. But essentially, you're creating a subscription within Insight. And that subscription is completely independent of Eloqua, and you can subscribe anybody to a report. So if you wanted to send a report to your mother, so yeah, scan that code, have a look at that page, and you'll find there's a bunch of resources there that can help you with that. So one thing that we like to do is share with you a little bit of attribution, partly just to indicate how easy it is to obtain, but the value that it can also deliver. So in the context of our webinar this afternoon, what we wanted to show you was a sort of open the kimono a little bit, I suppose, and show you how we measure those things. So we have 3 emails essentially that are sent to invite people to attend the webinar today, along with some LinkedIn advertising. And also organic, so where people have shared things internally, potentially with their teams. First email, let's have a look. So the first email delivered about 29% of registrants for today's webinar. The second email that we sent, which is the email that is sent to people who didn't open the first one and have not registered. So you can see that one delivered slightly more. Then the third email is a little bit more unique, I suppose. That one goes to people who did open the first invitation, but did not register. So that one is worded slightly differently than number 2. Number 2 is really just a repeat with a change of subject line. But number 3 acknowledges that the person did open the first email, but didn't complete the form to register for the webinar. Then LinkedIn advertising, so 29%. So as I look down the list of people who have joined us this afternoon, a couple of you may well have been from LinkedIn advertising. So thank you for responding, and hope you enjoyed today's session. And then organic. So organic is, in this particular case, it's a couple of individuals whose lead source information tells us that it looks like somebody has registered themselves and then simply forwarded the registration page link internally to colleagues. There's no attribution in place there. So that would indicate, generally speaking, that's more organic. So we show that to you each month just as a little bit of an indication as to which of the emails are working, and also just to understand a little bit of one way that attribution can help you and help you evaluate the effectiveness of your campaign. So consent management and an Eloqua perspective. Let's have a closer look at how Eloqua interprets this information. But first of all, let's understand exactly what consent management is. So when I scoured the internet and to try and find a nice explanation, the folks at Bloomreach sort of came back to me as having one of the nicest definitions. So it really is a system or process that really allows customers to determine, or prospects to determine, how their information or what personal information they're willing to share with the business. You get to manage that as Eloqua users by your form design process that you go through to grab that information and to bring it into your instance of Eloqua, and subsequently probably into the CRM platform as well. Certainly with changes around cookies, that has forced our hand in a number of ways in the way that we do this and the process that we go through to do this. Then as we look over to our European friends with the GDPR legislation within the EU, and also California with their code as well, there's certainly an increased and heightened awareness, I think, amongst most digital marketers, that they need to be a little bit more robust in this process. And that for many of us, there are potentially even legislative requirements that would force us to capture certain information and have that information readily available from a retrieval point of view as well. But the folks at Bloomreach make a really good point, and that is, let's not confuse preference management with consent management, two very different things. And as they say, they do sound the same, but actually they're quite different. The second bullet point here, I think, wraps it up quite nicely, where we say that they're both critical parts of creating a privacy-first and a customer-centric strategy, but it's important for the business to understand the difference between the two concepts. One is potentially more wrapped up in legal requirements. The second is probably more the domain of marketers and what we're doing to try and understand the individual better so that we can tailor the experience that we deliver to people more readily. Preference management, more so the domain of marketers. Consent management, delivered by marketers, but probably in concert with in-house counsel and more from a legal requirement. Let's have a look then at the types of data that we have available that we would be working with. And cookie related data is certainly one of those. Now, it's generally not personally identifiable. It's all about tracking an individual and seeing what they're doing in different places, etc., across the internet. The other type of data is disclosed data. So this is more the domain of the Eloqua user, where what we're doing is presenting forms. And just as you registered to attend our webinar today, there are a series of questions that we asked you. And some of that information is personally identifiable, some is not necessarily, but we have a responsibility, obviously, to store that information and then also be able to retrieve that information quite easily. So in the context of what we're talking about today, the cookie related is not so much where our focus will be. Is very much more around the disclosed data, e.g. name, email address, office address, phone numbers, those sorts of things that more identify an individual. Go ahead and have a look at this particular blog post, if you like, again with your phone, if you just wanted to scan that particular QR code. What that will show you, it'll take you off to our blog, and it's a blog by Matt Hensley, who's on the line today. Matt's our marketing manager, talking about the changes from third-party data and the increased reliance, I suppose, that we're going to have on first-party data, and gives you some tips. And as Eloqua users, you'll find this particularly relevant. It's more of a focus for you as Eloqua people. So have a look at that. All right, so let's continue with those types of data. So there's this disclosed data that we talk about. But the other thing that we have available to us as Eloqua customers is digital body language. So this behavioral data, the actions that a person has actually taken on the website, visiting various pages, their engagement or lack of engagement with email content and form submissions, all of these things together combined become digital body language. And so we use that, which becomes engagement data, in concert with data that we have from a profile point of view, first name, last name, email, those sorts of things. So you've got a range of different types of data that we can play with. So a couple of things to look at in the relation to the way Eloqua manages this process or manages this content for you. You've got all form submission data that comes into Eloqua is essentially stored on the contact. In some cases, you may push some off to your custom object, but largely it will go onto the Eloqua contact. The key thing to understand though is the contact is very much a one-to-one relationship. And so over time, that data will change. So if we capture, for example, that an individual is currently living in Chicago, that at some point they will register for a future user group and lo and behold, they've maybe moved to Dallas, Texas. So as far as the contact is concerned within Eloqua, any record of that individual being in Chicago is now lost and is overridden by the fact that they're now living in Dallas, Texas. And that's fine. That's exactly how the contact is designed to work. It always gives you the most current piece of information and the most current profile information that we know about a person. If original data is what you want, and I dare suggest to you that in the context of consent management, that's the original data that you want. You may want to capture all subsequent data as well and store that in a retrievable format, but it's certainly that original data that you want. Most likely scenario is that an individual will contact your organization and say, can you please provide me with any personal data that you have about me? And can you also please show how did I come into your database? How do you have my details that you started to communicate with me and email me information? And so if you don't have that original data, that becomes very difficult. What you want to do is be in a position where you can say, James Smith, you came into our database on the 23rd of April in 2018. You submitted a form relating to XYZ product. And that was a part of a campaign we ran called da, 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 da. And so if you want to be in that position to be able to respond to an individual in that level of detail, you can do it, but you need to do a few things up front in order to make that happen. And that's where our custom objects will come into play. So just as an example, some of you may well be in a scenario where you are working with the GDPR and you may have a business entity within the European Union, then this just gives you an example. So the GDPR legislation requires you to respond within a month, which in the scheme of things is a fairly lengthy amount of time. So there's no rush there. It would literally only take minutes to export data from Eloqua that would relate to a particular individual from a custom object. So that's quite easy to do, but that just gives you an example. And we can't charge either. We can't charge a person for providing that information. Part of the challenge I find in this process is language and vernacular, so to speak, and getting people on the same page as to what all these terms and phrases mean. If we look at it from the highest level, consent management is right at the top. It is the place where you've probably had legal advice in relation to the language that you put on forms, where you may have a checkbox for people to opt in, so to speak. So then we talk about the language of opt-in and what does that mean? Is that consent management, etc., all that sort of stuff? I would argue that underneath consent management, and this is where we now start to talk about Eloqua language, is this concept of somebody being subscribed globally, or yes, this is where I would equate the term opt-in. So the person has opted into communications from your organization. By default, Eloqua will always have the person as subscribed globally. This means essentially that Eloqua assumes that you as an organization have the necessary business processes in place that ensure once a person arrives into Eloqua, whether it be through a form submission or maybe through CRM integration or even through an Excel upload that you've got of information, that you have received consent from those particular individuals to be emailing them at some particular point. And so that's the standard default, I suppose. Now below that, and this is where Eloqua differs from some other platforms, is we then begin to offer what we call email group subscriptions. So now this is largely marketing spin, right? The whole concept of an email group within the Eloqua world is to provide a way that makes it easier for people to tell you exactly what it is they're interested in and what they'd like to hear about. And then if they feel some degree of being overwhelmed or they've received too much information, it gives them the ability to unsubscribe from an individual stream of thought or a particular email group. It's not an opt-out, so you see the opt-out is on the next level up. It's simply an unsubscribe. So they're simply unsubscribing Just like you might get multiple magazines. Maybe I'm showing my age here, but you might subscribe to multiple magazines to your home. Simply because you unsubscribe from one of those magazines doesn't mean that all magazine subscriptions will stop. That's not how it works. So much the same from an email group point of view. Okay, so now what do you do if your company has many brands, and what exactly are people opting into? Look, Eloqua makes this quite easy to manage, and you can do it in a few ways. You may have a single instance of Eloqua and have multiple brands functioning from that single instance of Eloqua. Or if you're an enterprise client of Oracle Eloqua, then you can, I think it's up to 10 separate instances of Eloqua. So perhaps that even becomes easier. It's certainly not more difficult. It certainly probably becomes easier. Often the piece that is critical from a multi-brand point of view under a single company is wanting to make sure that there's a succinct brand experience through that whole process. So I think the easiest way to show this is via an example. And the point there I make around security labels. So if you are familiar with security labels and what they mean in Eloqua, it's essentially a way for your Eloqua administrator to cordon off certain contacts to certain Eloqua users. So a really basic example, let's say we have a single instance of Eloqua, we have a team sitting in the US, in Los Angeles, and that same company has a large office presence potentially here in Sydney, Australia. And so what you're able to do is set up security labels, which means that the Eloqua users in the US only see US-based or potentially global clients, versus the Australian marketing team, when they log into Eloqua, all they see are potentially clients across Australia, New Zealand, and maybe Asia. So you can create those parameters within the system, and we use security labels to help you do that. Now you can configure it so an individual Eloqua user, or usually a team of Eloqua users, would see everybody if that's what you wanted. But the security labels become really helpful because it means if the team in Los Angeles are having a fun corporate activity where they're learning to surf down at Huntington Beach or something, you don't want to invite people from Australia to come and join you on a Saturday for a charity surf day because that's highly unlikely. At the moment, the Australian government's not even letting us out of the country. So that would make it extremely difficult. But security labels is a way for you to control that level of access and who's able to send what to people. So the one example that's usually often used because it's such a massive company and a brand that everyone knows is, of course, our good friends at GE. Now, I have no idea if the folks at GE use Eloqua. I would imagine somewhere in that huge organization, there'd be some Eloqua users somewhere, but just wanted to give you an example. So if we look at three of the particular business units, of which there are many, for the case of the purposes of our example, let's assume that GE, the parent company, purchases Eloqua, and they purchase one single instance of Eloqua, but they wanted to have their aviation, healthcare, and power businesses all using that one instance, but delivering at the same time a unique branded experience. Now, part of that branded experience ties into forms and landing pages, like so subdomains, for instance, that would sit under each of those different brands. The concept within Eloqua, using what's called a branding and deliverability plugin or add-on, is to enable you to do exactly that. So this means URLs, reply to emails, those sorts of things will have a very distinctive GE aviation feel to them versus a GE healthcare or a GE power example. So instead of all just being a single branded company name at the top, it is in fact branded for those three organizations. So in the context of opt-in and consent management, and this potentially becomes more of a legal discussion than it does a technology discussion, when someone fills in an aviation, GE aviation form, what exactly are they opting into? Are they opting into GE Aviation, or are they opting in to GE, the parent company? And if they are opting into GE, the parent company, does that mean that the healthcare team can email them? So as I said, it's more probably a legal discussion than it is a technology discussion. The upside of this scenario is that however your legal team, generally speaking, would elect to want to implement a consent management process or make it a little bit more robust than perhaps it is today. I honestly have not been in a situation in sort of 8+ years of working with Eloqua where I've had to tell a client, well, no, we can't do that. Eloqua does have a very robust process and system to manage consent and to capture that opt-in and to record that information. And it can be pretty much as your organization needs it to be. So we obviously provide some advice on the most effective way to do that. But at the end of the day, it does need to get the final sign off, of course, from your legal team as well. So just by way of FYI, I won't go into too much detail on these two things, and you may well have these currently sitting on your instance of Eloqua. So it's referred to as a branding and deliverability add-on, and we've got Jason, our account director, on the line. So I think if I recall, if you've got the basic edition of Eloqua, this is an add-on that you would purchase. It's also an add-on for the standard edition, but is included, I believe, in the enterprise edition of Eloqua. You can have a chat to your Oracle representative in relation to that. That's the branding bullet points. This information is actually taken directly from the My Oracle support pages. If that means anything to you, that's fantastic. You can see they're kind of broken down into two pieces, the branding and then also the deliverability piece as well. But let's jump in. So just wanted to try and drive home this. I wanted to cover this a couple of times and present it in a few different ways because I think it's really critical that we understand exactly what's going on here. So from a global subscription point of view, as we said, this is the default. This is where people will arrive, and when they come into your platform, they're subscribed globally to what it is that your organization has to offer. And then from an Eloqua point of view, you're in a position to present various email groups. And this is the internal language that you use, obviously, to describe them. By default, they're what we call no status. So no status indicates that the person has neither subscribed or unsubscribed, but they're in the platform. And you can see in the background, that big blue circle indicates that person is globally subscribed. They're not going anywhere, but they at no point have proactively subscribed or unsubscribed from anything. But that will happen over time. And so over time, as you communicate with them, you'll invite them to do certain things. You might be invite them to webinars, events, perhaps invite them to subscribe to your newsletter or other thought leadership that you might present. And so you've got all of this information available and people will do that over time. Now, of course, as time progresses, people will change their mind. And as they change their mind, they may unsubscribe from certain things. But again, you can see our big blue circle is still sitting in the background there. The person hasn't opted out. They haven't globally unsubscribed from what you're doing. They've just said, look, yeah, no more newsletters or no more event invitations for me, but they're happy to continue with a few other subscriptions that you're offering. So this is a quick breakdown for you on those email groups and how they represent subscription. So the no status, as we said, at no point has the person indicated either way that they'd like to hear from you, but the subscribed and unsubscribed mean exactly as they're talking. They're not opt-outs. We probably shouldn't use that language in the concept as we talk about email groups, but certainly from a subscription point of view, at an email group level, yes, subscribed or unsubscribed. So what does that look like in Eloqua? So when you arrive in Eloqua and you look at the contact, looking first of all at the summary tab, which is your default, you'll notice that there's a checkbox or a tick sitting against subscribed globally. So this is the overarching fact that the individual has opted in to communications from your particular organization. If we then move across to the third tab, which is the preferences tab, we're now looking at group subscriptions or email group subscriptions. And you can see here the email group names can vary and the status of an individual will vary as well. So in this example that you can see on the screen, I'm fairly aggressive in my subscriptions, looking at a range of those that are available. But there are a couple of there that have no status. So that tells you that at some point or no point have I actually said yes or no to either of those groups. All right, so what the email groups and how to manage those subscriptions, looking at custom objects and so on and so forth. And this will all tie in to helping us understand where that consent management fits in and how we can store that data that's coming into our platforms. So let's have a look at your organization today and try and get a little bit of a feel for what's going on. So So people will opt in at some particular point, and you'll provide a range of ways for people to do that, whether you do that through a form or whether you may be doing it through the website, which would still be a form, but maybe it's a slightly different one. The CRM is another way that people come into the platform. So opt-in is very much an industry term. It's very much a language that people use in CRM. It's sometimes visible as the word opt-in, but you need to be clear about what that person's actually opting into. Are they opting into email communications? Is it direct mail that goes by post? Are SMS communications something as well that they may do? So in Eloqua speak, we call that globally subscribed. And so I would use those two terms interchangeably, one being a more industry language and one being a more Eloqua type of language. So let's take that globally subscribed. And as we talked about there a little bit ago, we've got various email groups that are being set up. Now, of course, calling them email groups doesn't really work. We want to create some differentiation. So that's where we start to apply different language, whether it's in-person events, webinars, newsletters, thought leadership, and the list can go on. You don't want it to go on too far, but you certainly want to have some granularity there for people. So once an individual provides you with expressed information, so they've actually articulated first name, last name, email, and excuse me, and a few other bits and pieces, the purpose of the custom object, as against the contact, is its ability to hold your data for as long as you need. And so if we go back to that scenario where you could potentially be receiving a notification or request from an individual to provide you with that data and also to confirm with them exactly how you came to have that information in the first place, then by uploading and putting that information directly onto a custom object is going to put you in a much better position. Now, it's also easily able to be exported. And that's one of the key things. And if we look across the Atlantic Ocean to our European friends, then we can see there that the GDPR means or stipulates quite clearly that information that you provide has to be in a format that is easily opened and accessed by an individual. So if you think Excel is probably that one pretty universal platform where data is shared. And so you don't want to be in a position where you have to provide people with obscure data formats that they can't even open or access. So something to think about there. Then this concept of the original data and the action that the person took when they handed over their data. So if you want to be able to show the individual that it was, this form on this date with this campaign, then adding that information to a custom object makes the most sense. Now, tying it all together and to make that easier, a program, so an Eloqua program, is probably the smartest way to do this. So that would mean that you're not having to map every individual form and its data to a custom object. We can simply do it once using a program and then just simply add that program into your Eloqua form processing, which will then complete that process for you every time. So we've got another QR code here for you to scan if you wanted to jump in and have a look at that. Again, just an additional blog post and information that you might find helpful on some of these aspects. Okay, let's take a look at email groups and the role they play in the process. So we're just going to jump into Eloqua here and have a little bit of a view. So the first part I wanted to show you as you look at the contact within Eloqua, and I'll zoom in there just a little bit so you can see that in a bit more detail. So this is actually my contact stored in our instance of Eloqua. And you can see once we go to preferences, the configuration that is available there. So you can see you've got date and timestamp as to the last change, but not the original. Okay, so if you're wanting to capture all of that information from an original point of view and retrieve it, then that's where we need to look at we need to look at a custom object as one solution to store that information. So you've got that in a retrievable format. So from an email group point of view, we have a range of options that you can deliver. Now, at Marketing Cube, we've chosen to not use the default. So you can see here the confirmation pages, etc. We've elected not to use those. We've developed our own using the Eloqua landing pages. So instead of the generic out of the box Eloqua page, which is actually this one, which I can preview. So this is the generic out of the box Eloqua one, and depending on the size of your organization and the complexity of what you're doing, it's perfectly helpful and useful. Essentially, people would reach this sort of a page from the footer of an email. So if they click on unsubscribe or manage my preferences, then they could arrive at a page that looks exactly like this. And that's the default out of the box Eloqua. Obviously, this information here is personalized to each organization. This is clearly all about Marketing Cube, but that's one way that you can do that. And the whole point of the email group is that people are able to see that they can remove themselves from certain subscriptions. However, at the very bottom, you've got remove me from your distribution list, which is globally unsubscribed or opt out, essentially, is what that one is at the bottom. But you'll notice what this doesn't do, this particular out of the box function, it doesn't actually show the individual any of the information you have stored about them, except for their email address. So the benefit of creating your own page, again, using Eloqua landing pages and forms to do that, is that you've got a lot more control over the information that you can show people. And deliver, I think, a better, a richer customer experience from that point of view as well. But your email groups become a very valuable tool to help you go through that whole process. So if we look at, for example, if we jump into segments, segments enable you to essentially filter people based on subscriptions, and you're able to make some changes there. Let's have a look. If I delete that, when we look over here and we use the filters, you've got the ability to make some changes. So let's have a look. So you've got subscribe to groups. And so here you can be very specific and adding in a whole range of different options to capture that information. So it enables you to tailor your communications very specifically. However, at the same time, if you've got people who have unsubscribed, then you can exclude those people from those communications as well. So email groups is certainly one of the more robust ways to prevent. I mean, if you think about one of the challenges or frustrations I have with all the different types of email communications I get, is sometimes I'm over it and I want to disengage. So if I click on unsubscribe, I go from there directly to a page that says, okay, we're sorry to see you go. Why are you leaving us? This, or this. Or even worse, I click on that and the next page I see is simply, you have been unsubscribed, you'll never hear from us again. And it's like, well, actually, I just didn't want to receive that type of information. I still want to hear from you, but you didn't give me any options. So that's an all or nothing approach. And we certainly don't want an all or nothing approach. That's just a waste of time. It really adds no value to anybody in that whole process. So using things like either the out of the box Eloqua Preference Center is a good start, but I would suggest to you that it can certainly be improved. And if you jump onto marketingcube.com.au, or if you even go back to the email, the confirmation email that you received to join us for today's session, in the very bottom of that, you'll see click here to unsubscribe or manage my preferences. And so that will bring you to our preference center. It behaves a little differently depending on how you reach it. In this particular scenario, I've come from our website, and so I'm asking people to sign up like so. And let's fill in this information. And click on next. And so this information that you see here, that first screen, that will populate the Eloqua contact. This information is the subscriptions. That's what you and I see them as. But what's happening in the back end is this is then becoming a email group subscription. So the individual is being subscribed. But you'll notice that when I go, so think of these as no status with the question mark. But you'll notice now my only other option is to unsubscribe. I can't go back to no status, right? So I'm either subscribed or I'm unsubscribed. Click on next. And here what we want to do is capture preferences, for example. So this is helping us understand what the individual is most interested in, which of course will then enable us to deliver a range of comms to people. And then here, the most important part in the context of what we're doing today is looking at that language that enables the opt-in. And so the checkbox, I agree to opt into communications. If it's already ticked, I've previously opted in. So this is using some Eloqua functionality available on an Eloqua landing page. So that because you've put that experience onto an Eloqua landing page versus using a CMS, i.e. your corporate website, you're able to deliver a much richer experience using the data that you've got as well. And so that I click on the different things that I'm interested in. Now this information sits on the Eloqua contact and is just a checkbox. And if I should at any point come here and untick, then that will translate into the Eloqua contact. And so in the scheme of things, all of this information, while being sent to the Eloqua contact and also to email groups, can also be taken and submitted, or not submitted, but written to a custom object as the original source of information as to how Derek came to be in the Marketing Cube database. Okay, and so then save preferences. Now, if you click on that link in the footer, as I said, of any of our emails, you will get a slightly different experience where instead of having those 3 individual pages load, you actually get the 3 pages directly on a single page. So 2 slightly different experiences depending on how you reach the preference center. So again, a preference center where we've wrapped in the consent management side of things as well. Okay. So the next release of Eloqua is due in August, and we're right on the cusp of being in the middle, where we don't yet have information available from Oracle as to what we can expect to see in release 20C. And we've already covered release 20B twice already in the last 2 months. So you'll find information on our blog that will talk in more detail about those if they're of interest to you. I certainly encourage you to have a look. The one key thing that is always worthwhile revisiting is just ensuring that your browser experience is the best possible experience when using Eloqua. So Firefox or Chrome, the 2 applications that are most favored, and they're the additional version numbers of that particular software. So at that point, we'd love to throw open to Q&A. And if we do have any questions from the audience, we'd love to walk through those with you. But if not, thank you so much for spending some time with us this afternoon. We appreciate the investment of your time, and we look forward to seeing you online next month. We'll send you some details and replay links as well. Maybe share those with the team. Thanks everybody, and have a great afternoon. Cheers, bye-bye.